Chapter 41 The Other Continent. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In the blink of an eye, Yi Si was already 25 m away. She did not stop there. She activated stealth and disappeared into the gray map. The rogue was baffled. His second stunning skill, Stun, was ready, but the target had disappeared before he could cast it. He then received a system notification. Target has disappeared, skill casting failed. The scariest thing during a PK was not an opponent's mechanical skills or even their damage output, it was if your opponent disappeared and you could not spot them. Yi Si's sudden disappearance turned the tables. The rogue's brief moment of hesitation meant that he had already compromised his position even after he turned on his stealth. Yi Si lurked 25 m away from the rogue. She chugged down bottles of health potion while watching the rogue closely. In a PK match against a hunter, one must be careful to not place oneself more than 2 m away from the hunter. A hunter's attack had a blind spot of 2 m. If a target was within the 2 m range of a hunter, the hunter could not launch ranged attacks against their target. A hunter without their ranged attacks was no different from a bird that had lost its wings. When one was in a PK match against a rogue, one must always remember to not give the rogue a chance to get to one's back. A rogue had a lot of control skills. Once they got behind a player, the player would lose all initiative. Once someone was hit by a rogue's control skill, unless the player had some very OP items, the battle would be over then and there. Yi Si silently calculated the path that the rogue would take and planted a frost trap there. She'd appear out of stealth when she cast a skill. It was very dangerous as rogues and hunters shared the similarity of relying on agility. Both classes had high speed. A trap needed 3 seconds to be completely set up. Within that 3 seconds, if the rogue had an additional speed buff, he would be able to dash up to her and use a staggering blow. That was why Yi Si kept an eye out for the stealth rogue. In the last few milliseconds of the frost trap's deployment, Yi Si detected a presence creeping up from behind her with her high perception. The person pounced at her at high speed. It's finished. Yi Si felt a chill creep down her spine, and her body dodged to the side out of reflex. Mississippi. The rogue was disheartened when he saw his staggering blow miss at a crucial moment like that. It was a crucial moment, how could he miss it? That was not as depressing as the fact that the huntress dodged his follow-up attack by lowering her body and rolling away on the ground. If that was not depressing enough, what happened next would sink the rogue further into depression. Yi Si's movement caused the rogue to miss and he stumbled forward due to his momentum. He then stepped on Yi Si's frost trap. The rogue was instantly frozen in a huge ice block. Yi Si stood back up and immediately cast a red empowered hunter's mark on him. At the same time, she released OL-3 and backed off. A frost trap would typically last for 12 seconds. But if attacked, the ice will shatter and the frozen target would regain freedom of movement. Since this was not a fight against mobs, OL-3's taunt had no use. Instead, Yi Si commanded it to cast a damage over time, DOT, skill, bleed. Yi Si herself jumped onto a wilted tree and used venomous snake needle and rapid fire on the rogue. The rogue's first course of action was to cast a stun on OL-3, then he headed straight for Yi Si. Despite his speed, Yi Si remained calm. They were close to each other in terms of agility, and she also had a slightly better balance than the rogue. However, when it came to speed, she had a purple equipment with +7 speed bonus. With the distance between them, as long as he did not possess and dashing skills, the outcome of the battle was already sealed. The rogue had good equipment as well. Yi Si's excellent equipment could only deal a little more than 400 to the rogue. Despite his high attack, rogues were still glass cannons. After taking 2 to 3 hits that carried more than 300 damage, the rogue's lifeless body crashed onto the ground before he could get close to Yi Si. You received kill glory +2. Yi Si was momentarily stunned, he was a player from another continent. There were 5 continents in Fate, the North, South, East, West and the Middle Continent. The East Continent and South Continents were allies, players from these continents could not kill each other. It was the same for players from the West Continent and North Continent. The Mid-Continent was not open yet at this stage of the game. In contrast, the East-South Alliance and the West-North Alliance were enemies. Players from both factions could kill each other on sight. There would be no penalties, and they would receive kill glory instead. A player could exchange for unique PvP equipment with enough kill glory. Killing the rogue granted ECI kill glory. It meant that the rogue was from either the West or North Continent. But what was a LVL-20 rogue doing in the heartlands of the East Continent? Since a player from a hostile continent came here to give away kill glory, ECI would feel really bad if she did not try and kill him a few more times. The moment the rogue's body fell lifeless to the ground, ECI entered stealth and dismissed OL-3, it was basically a beacon announcing her presence. Not 2 minutes later, the rogue's corpse turned into a pile of bones, and ECI leaped out. She drew her bow and cast rapid fire at a silhouette not far away from the original position of the corpse. Players who had just revived possessed only 40% of their HP and mana, which of course meant that it was easy for ECI to make a short work out of him. Puff, the rogue dropped dead once again. He was depressed. He had spent a great effort sneaking into the East Continent in search for some stuff. When he saw the Huntress, he thought that he could take her down easily because her equipment appeared to be low tier. He had not expected to run into someone so tenacious. He was sure that his skills were on par with the Huntress, but she seemed to have some very good equipment. He misjudged her strength and had paid the price. If the rogue knew that he would end up like this, he would have definitely avoided the Huntress. East Continent NPCs were hostile towards him. He could not repair his broken equipment in the city if they were damaged too much or if he had died too many times. He was glad that his items had not dropped, and decided to just stay on the ground. ECI crouched on the branch of a nearby tree, staring at the rogue's corpse. He did not even move for a full 10 minutes. He realized that ECI was camping nearby. Just as ECI was hesitating on whether to continue camping the rogue or not, a few messenger pigeons flew towards her. ECI deactivated stealth and received the letters sent by the pigeons. The rogue that was lying on the ground had a 360-degree field of vision after he died. He finally saw the Huntress on a branch 23 m away from him. He was glad that he had not immediately revived himself again. The letters were from Ideal Height 1.7 m and let go of that girl. They were asking if she was okay, they sounded worried. ECI was touched. A warmth that she could not describe crept up her heart. To not further worry her two companions, she replied to the letter and told them that she was safe. Gomziyu, where are you right now? Yici's private message channel rang up. It was Peacock Blue. After she muted Peacock Blue for the first time, the system would automatically unmute her after 72 hours and Peacock Blue could send her private messages once again. However, Peacock Blue appeared to be different. She did not act high and mighty, nor did she act as if she was superior to ECI. Her tone was so ordinary that ECI nearly mistook her for a stranger. Although ECI had never liked Peacock Blue, but since she decided not to find fault with ECI this time, ECI would not do anything to provoke her either. I'm in the Desolate Lands. The Desolate Lands. Peacock Blue was obviously surprised by ECI's answer. She mumbled to herself for a moment and did not try to question ECI any further. She immediately stated her reason for contacting ECI, the guild will challenge the automaton formation in 3 hours, are you free? I'm free. ECI calculated the time it would take her to return to the chilly wetlands dungeon before she gave Peacock Blue an answer. I have a spot for you, are you coming? Peacock Blue still acted as if it was just official business, her voice did not betray any emotion. Sure, but I might be slightly late. After receiving a reply from ECI, Peacock Blue immediately ended the conversation. It seemed that she was not happy to have to talk to Yi Si, but to Yi Si, it did not matter. Knowing that, she did not have any more time to waste on the rogue. Yi Si jumped down from the tree and said to the rogue, "There's something that I need to do, let's fight again some other time." Then she left. The rogue revived right after Yi Si left. But before he could stand still, he heard another puff, and he dropped dead again. "Aren't you supposed to be gone already?" The rogue could not hold himself back anymore and shouted at Yi Si. "To tell you the truth, even if someone gave up on camping you, you shouldn't revive so quickly, you know." Yi Si grinned at the rogue from 20 m away. She summoned her steed and waved gracefully at the rogue, "This time I'm gone for real." Chapter 42 The top of the charts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The rogue waited for a while before he got up. Unexpectedly, more pew-pew noises resounded, and he once again fell into the embrace of the earth. "What are you doing? Stop toying with people." The rogue almost went mad. Yi Si's hearty laughter rang out from afar as she said, "Hey, hasn't anyone taught you to observe your surrounding before getting up? I am really leaving this time." The rogue was so depressed that he was about to weep. He was really unlucky today. Originally, he had just wanted to earn some kill glory. Why did this fiend appear? This time, no matter what she said, he firmly decided to not respawn. However, this time, Yi Si had not lied. She really left and rode her little red horse, heading towards the Red Lake City through the Road of the Desolate Lands. In order to get to the Red Lake City from the Desolate, one would need to bypass 4 to 5 maps, some of which contained LVL 50 mobs. Yi Si had to be very careful throughout the journey, and it took her over 3 hours to finally reach the Red Lake City. She asked in the guild channel whether it's time to assemble. A reply told her that the team was already at the entrance. She immediately threw the fishing rod and the fishing basket into her warehouse and rushed towards the dungeon. Although she had suffered throughout the journey as she rushed back to the Red Lake City from the Desolate Lands, Yi Si still felt very sorry. When she saw the group of players that had already assembled at the Gathering Rock in front of the Automaton Formation dungeon, she felt even more embarrassed. She had never really been that great. This time, she had actually made everyone wait this long during a guild gathering event, which was very unreasonable. Therefore, the moment Yi Si joined the team, she apologized sincerely to the entire team. "Everyone, really sorry that I'm late. It's alright. I heard from Little Blue that you came back from the Desolate Lands." Zero Arsenic responded, his face full of smiles. Zero Arsenic was a sorcerer equipped in a top-notch equipments. Without the aid of equipments similar to the Brooch of Deceit, one could tell his G was over 200 with a glance. Zero Arsenic was the vice leader of the guild, and he was also the best sorcerer in the guild. He stood out among the rest with his superior armor. Since Zero Arsenic said so, there was no need for Yi Si to explain anymore. As such, she just replied with a nod. Rushing back from that place must have been dangerous. I remember that there were a few high-level maps on the route back. Was it easy for you when you were on your way back? Zero Arsenic's smiling eyes appeared rather gentle, and his voice also sounded extremely gentle. However, from the beginning to the end, Yi Si felt that his eyes were conveying something indescribable. His eyes were like that of a fox, studying its prey. I just needed to run along the big road without deviating left or right. Even a level 1 smurf could run back by following this route. With neither a servile nor overbearing tone, Yi Si warded off Zero Arsenic's probing with a soft answer. The smile in Zero Arsenic's eyes became deeper. No one could tell what emotions hid deep within his black eyes. He nodded and stopped talking to Yi Si. He then turned and said to the team, "Today, 2 squadrons will advance into the dungeon and explore it. Everyone, don't be greedy. Just do your best. Everyone will obtain a reward of 5 points. If we manage to pass it, then the points will naturally be higher." Joyful chatter could be heard amidst the assembled group. One could tell that with the stimulation of money, many people were eager to give it a try. After completing his briefing, Zero Arsenic assigned Yi Si to the second squadron and ordered the leaders of the two squadrons to lead their members into the dungeon. The Automaton Formation Dungeon was a 25-man dungeon. Steel-Blooded Battle Spears Corps members consisted of around 100 players. They were split into two squadrons to explore the chilly wetlands, with 50 players in each squadron. However, the ones who were present to explore the Automaton Formation Dungeon were the cream of the crop. All of them were selected from the Steel-Blooded Battle Spears Corps members. Their game sense and awareness were more than a match for normal guild members and wild party members. The GS of the entire squadron had an average of 240 and above. They were especially eye-catching as they gathered and awaited orders. Yi Si followed the second squadron into the Automaton Formation Dungeon. She suddenly felt that she went overboard in her attempt to disguise her equipment. In the midst of the second squadron, she stood out the most due to her disguised poor-quality weapon. The person in command was Crimson Millions. His voice had a hint of Jiangnan, 1, accent. His voice was soft and nice, with a little passion in it. But in exploring a dungeon, clearing it was the most important. Anything else simply did not matter. Yi Si blended into the midst of the ranged classed players, keeping a low profile. However, due to her superior equipment, her DPS was always at the top. She dealt more damage than the top player of the second squadron, Seductive Dance. As Crimson Millions commanded the squad orderly, he opened up the damage chart habitually. He was flabbergasted after just one glance. Gong Ziyu was at the top of the chart. Her damage dealt was several 100,000 points more than Seductive Dance. And on the damage taken chart, Gong Ziyu was at the bottom of the list. She hadn't taken any damage. This attracted the attention of Crimson Millions. Despite her 2 dungeons First Blood, and her First Blood of Wild Boar King with World Conqueror, Crimson Millions' view of Yi Si was similar to Peacock Blue. In his opinion, Yi Si was merely lucky. Crimson Millions had been paying attention to Gong Ziyu ever since they've entered the dungeon. But she appeared to be mingling in the midst of the ranged classes, and did not appear to have much of a performance. He was more convinced than ever that Yi Si was merely lucky with her First Bloods. That was, of course, until he took a look at the damage charts. The automaton formation was filled with tiny metal balls that would explode and deal damage in a wide area. Even Purple Corydalus, one of the best players with the best positioning skills in the second squadron, suffered some damage. But this huntress had not even suffered a single point of damage. For an average player, the charts were simply rows of numbers. But in the eyes of an expert or a commander, it was the thing that determined the strength of their party members. Dishing out the highest damage while receiving none. The automated generated charts would never be wrong. Crimson Millions' perspective of Gong Ziyu instantly changed. This huntress was just like what Zero Arsenic described. Her strength was very well hidden. Crimson Millions closed the damage charts and continued giving out orders. DPS, beware of your aggro, be careful of any OT. Yi Si took a glance at her aggro after listening to Crimson Millions' words. Her aggro was among the lowest. Seductive Dance noticed the damage charts as well, and his facial expression changed. He had been gaming for almost 8 years, and he was always playing as a DPS. His skills are undeniably good. He also had very excellent equipment. His damage could even be on par with Zero Arsenic. After being used to be on the top of the damage chart for so long, how could he retain his composure after being placed in the second spot? Since Yi Si was in the midst of the ranged classes, she could see the facial expression of Seductive Dance. Sorcerers are different from warlocks. They do not have much aggro controlling skills during the early stages of the game. If they did not control their damage output, their aggro would almost always rise to the point where they could no longer control it. In a short period of time, not more than 10 seconds, the elite guardian that was focused on the MT and secondary tank turned and charged towards the ranged classes. It was the first time such an incident occurred under Crimson Millions' command. The Sorcerer Seductive Dance is now OT. A system notification chimed in. Crimson Millions shouted, "Seductive Dance, stop. You're OT. MT, do your job, don't let the mobs reach the ranged classes." Before his words died away, before the MT could arrive, Crimson Millions saw a light and nimble figure jumping out from the group of ranged classes. A red mark immediately appeared on the elite guardian's head. Seeing this, Crimson Millions was shocked again as he exclaimed, "The mark of Hunter." He didn't expect that a hunter in their team would know how to use this skill. When he saw the one who had jumped out, he suddenly felt that everything made sense. Of course, this person was Gongziyu. Empowered Hunter's Mark, Falcon Protection, Snake Venom Needle and OL-3's Taunt were casted in that short moment. She then made a 180 degrees turn and changed course in midair. Yi Si released Rapid Fire and Decoy in midair, dealing 4 to 5 critical hits with 2000 damage each. She had successfully transferred the Elite Guardian's aggro to herself from Seductive Dance. As the Elite Guardian was dashing towards the ranged classes, it suddenly stopped and made a turn, heading towards Yi Si. The danger of the team of ranged classes was alleviated. Her movements were extremely quick. From defending to attracting aggro, it only took her 3 seconds. Her beautiful and acute control amazed everyone. Even Crimson Millions stopped in surprise. He couldn't believe his eyes. Could an ordinary huntress get up this way? Can an ordinary huntress borrow external forces and fly in the air as if the force of gravity didn't exist? Mortal! You have enraged me. Although the Elite Guardian was not the boss, but it was still one of the monsters in the dungeon that were very hard to deal with. The Elite Guardian roared and dashed a few steps forward. The instant it approached Yi Si, it casted fear towards Yi Si. It actually hit. Yi Si had just descended the ground and was about to jump when she got stunned. Her whole body trembled and she could no longer make any movements, showing a rigid state. This was the normal behavior of someone that was hit by the fear. The duration of the fear was 5 seconds and Yi Si counted the time. The Elite Guardian could release 2 attacks during these 5 seconds, and Yi Si didn't know whether she could endure it or not. As the sound of the wind blew, the Elite Guardian had already caught up to Yi Si and with the raise of his hand its blade swooped down and it hacked down towards Yi Si. Translator's notes. Jiangnan. A province in China. Chapter 43 Challenging the Automaton Formation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Before anybody could react, the sharp blade of the Elite Guard hit a silvery shield with a sharp clank. Yi Si felt that someone had abruptly dashed out from behind her. They pressed their back against hers, then she heard the sounds of metal clashing. "Heh, Gongziyu, leave the rest to me." A light, smiling voice rang out from behind her. Yi Si could not turn back, but she felt as if a huge boulder in her heart was released in that moment. What are you guys standing around in a daze for? DPS and healers keep up. Crimson Millions' commanding voice once again rang out. As expected of a well-trained main force. Although such an unexpected event had occurred, within a few seconds, everyone had regained their composure. Such incidents were insufficient to disrupt their initial battle rhythm. Yi Si finally recovered. She turned to see that the person who was standing behind her and had taken that blow for her earlier wasn't Team 2's MT, but the second tank, Traceless Insanity. While retreating back to the long-range attack team, she recalled the things that had occurred earlier. She then looked at Traceless Insanity's handling of the role of tank. She noticed that although his skills as a tank were slightly lacking, his teamwork and positioning were all quite on point. A good party would be an ideal platform for him to get more training. In less than a year, he would probably become one of the top MTs around. Very quickly, the elite guards were all knocked out and a blue robe for warlocks appeared. Such equipment was not dropped by the boss. 3 warlocks rolled the dice and the one with the highest number happily acquired the equipment. After splitting up the equipment amongst themselves, Crimson Millions got everyone to take a break while he made adjustments for the party's battle rhythm. Seductive dance, I kept saying we need to control the damage output, don't be too greedy, don't OT. What's wrong with you? You're also an old-timer DPS now, there's no need for me to repeat that you need to handle aggro properly. Since this is an accident, I won't deduct your points. But the next time this happen again, I'll deduct 5 points straight away. Although Crimson Millions' voice had a certain softness unique to Jiang Nan, thought with his authority and slow enunciation, he exuded a tremendous pressure. Seductive Dance lowered his head as he munched on his bread. He knew that he had been too greedy and too concerned about his reputation, thus he did not dare to rebut any of Crimson Millions' words. However, when Crimson Millions once again announced that they were going to press on forward, he looked toward Yi Ci, who appeared as if she had no regard for the others around her. Yi Ci intended to send a friend request to Traceless Insanity while they were having a break, but he unexpectedly sent her a friend request of his own. After the two of them added each other as friends, Traceless Insanity sent a private message, "Hey, your mechanical skill was really good. Earlier, when I saw it, it really stirred me up. Would you be able to teach me?" Yi Ci did not reject him and said, "A hunter's and a warrior's movements are different. But if you don't mind, we can exchange pointers when we have time." Alright. Let's do it when we get out of the dungeon." Traceless Insanity was an impatient person. If not for the fact that they were still in the dungeon, he would have wanted to immediate exchange pointers with Yi Ci. No problem. The party continued to advance and very quickly, arrived at the deepest point of the dungeon. Rows and rows of automaton were perfectly lined up, seemingly inanimate. Behind these automatons, there were 2 tall stone towers, with a few dark gnome on the top. There were 2 huge gates behind the 2 blocks of towers, with a giant robot right in front of it. That was the automaton's formation's final boss, number 48. Based on the dungeon's design, this was the entrance that lead to a cold and humid land. They must bring out the quest item from the cruel pit and it must be brought out and placed onto the large gates behind robot number 48. When that was done, the path toward the cold and humid land would be unobstructed. Number 48 was massive in size, but the most challenging point of the dungeon was not the boss. After all, even a tough boss would not be able to hold its ground if it was swarmed by players. Moreover, number 48 was merely a blockhead. It was simply too easy to defeat. The hardest challenge in the dungeon was that automaton's formation and the 2 blocks of stone towers behind them. Steel-blooded battle spear's intention was for them to explore the new dungeon. Various guilds had just broken through the cruel pit recently and there were not many of them who had challenged the automaton's formation. With no information and no video guides online, Steel-blooded battle axe could only brace themselves and challenge the dungeon head-on. Crimson Millions did not know how difficult this dungeon was, but Yi Ci knew very well that it was not easy. There were a total of 81 automatons and attacking one of them would trigger the rest of the automatons to attack all at once. The dark gnomes on the 2 towers will also fire their cannons at targets that were besieged by the automatons. Those did not know of clearing away the swarm of automatons would suffer massive casualties. Crimson Millions got the others to take a break while he looked toward the automaton's formation from afar, remaining silent. After a short while, he turned to say to the rest, "Although there are many monsters around, we'll do what we usually does, attract them one at a time and slowly kill them all." When Yi Ci heard this, she was dumbfounded. Wasn't that just asking for defeat? Not wanting to rebut the party leader in front of so many players, Yi Ci sent a privately message to Crimson Millions, "Leader, I don't think that is plausible. These monsters seem to be linked and if one was attacked, it's likely that the others would be triggered and attack all at once. Can we use another method to tackle this?" Those in the lead would tend to have their own way of thinking, as most of them would feel as if they had more battle experiences and had seen more things. There were not many who would be willing to accept other people's opinions before they were put into an unfavorable position. Crimson Millions was no different. He had been playing games for 5 to 6 years and had taken the lead in parties for over 4 years. He took pride in the fact that his leadership ability was not too bad. Although he thought well of Yi Si, it did not mean that he fully recognized the strength of this huntress. Therefore, he interrupted her with his unique and pleasant voice, "Gongzi, have you come here before?" It was bullshit. Not only that she had entered the dungeon before, she even did it multiple times. She was extremely familiar with the entire fate. But these were all things that Yi Si could not say. Therefore, she shook her head. No. Crimson Million smiled and continued to use that pleasant voice to emphasize, "Since we're exploring a new dungeon, we should try things a little at a time. Only then would we be able to find the best solution. You don't have to try and resort to trickeries right from the start." Although what Crimson Million said was not wrong, Yi Si was still speechless. What did he meant by resorting to trickeries? Her intention was not to have unnecessary sacrifices, and she had not wanted to waste money on fixing her equipment. How could he call that as resorting to trickeries? However, no matter what she says, Crimson Millions would probably not be willing to listen. Humans are creatures who would only learn after experiencing the worst. Yi Si sighed, and retreated back to the very back of the long-range attackers, no longer trying to persuade Crimson Millions. She would just wait for his command to launch their attacks. Once the monsters began to swarm up, she would immediately make her escape out of the dungeon. She had wanted to tell Traceless Insanity to get him to escape together with her, but eventually only sent out a private message, "During times of emergencies, you got to be smart and think for yourself." She did not want to blatantly tell him to escape. Moreover, she had just met Traceless Insanity and they could not even be considered close. She did not wish to let her words be spread out, or it would eventually be blackmail materials for others. Traceless Insanity actually did not really agree to Crimson Millions' plan either. When he received Yi Si's private message, he instantly understood that they had both thought of the same thing. He immediately replied, "Understood. If things doesn't look right, immediately escape out of the dungeon." The two were still talking when Crimson Millions gave the command and the long-range attackers began to launch their attacks on a robot in the extreme corner, and then Yi Si only remembered that the whole place became a big mess and that all the automatons swarmed toward them like gushing waves. Looking at the multitude of automatons, the people who had trypophobia immediately turned pale and their legs gave way. Those whose legs did not give way also immediately turned to run. Under this situation, they could no longer care for any battle rhythm or whatsoever. If they did not run, the many automatons would only bring about their utter destruction. Yi Si was standing furthest away, and she also had great agility and speed, thus she was the first to escape out from dungeon. Following behind her were a few other rogues, hunters, and rangers who were quick on their feet. These classes with high agility showed their superiority while they made their escape. Traceless Insanity was not as lucky. He was a warrior and did not have high agility. Although he had started making his escape at the first possible moment, he eventually died a heroic death right before the dungeon's entrance. The few who escaped reckoned that those inside were all dead, and he entered the dungeon once again. As expected, the long line of corpses really formed a trail of marker, guiding their way. The party managed to regroup. As they were exploring a new land and he had not accepted Yi Si's suggestion in the first place, Crimson Millions did not blame the members who managed to make their escapes. Saving their actual strength was also an important battle technique. Yi Si also pretended that she had not mentioned anything to Crimson Millions, and instead lowered her head and sat in a corner, munching on her bread, occasionally throwing 2 pieces of roasted meat to OL3, who was unrelentingly acting cute. Suddenly, the sound of a private chat rang out. It was Crimson Millions. "Gongzi, what method do you think is best to deal with this automaton's formation?" Although Crimson Millions was a leader with his own views, this did not mean that he was obstinate. When they first attacked, he had already realized that he had made an extremely grave mistake. Therefore, now that everyone was taking a break, he sent Yi Si a private message, hoping to get the Huntress' opinions. Yi Si turned to look toward Crimson Millions, only to realize that he was looking at her, smiling as he nodded his head, appearing very humble. Chapter 44 Expert of Destruction. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Since this was for the sake of clearing the dungeon, Yi Si wasn't petty about it. She wasn't holding any grudges about what had happened just now either. She looked at Crimson Millions and thought for a moment before speaking. Do you realize that the grass here is denser than other places in this dungeon? She had said this in hopes of Crimson Millions catching on, because she couldn't really tell him directly that there was an NPC hiding among the dense grass around the northwest corner that must be found in order to clear the dungeon. If she had said that, she was pretty sure Crimson Millions would then be wondering how she knew so much, even though it was her first time entering the dungeon. Crimson Millions only turned his head and checked out his surroundings after hearing Yi Si's words. The grass here was indeed a lot denser here compared to the areas they had went through, and had already grown taller than a person in most of the places here. If something was hidden among this dense grass, one would definitely miss it if they didn't search for it carefully. Everyone, search among the grass around the automaton's formation and look for clues to clear the dungeon. Crimson Millions was also an experienced leader. Yi Si had only briefly pointed it out and he had already caught onto it, so he immediately issued his order to the party members who were still taking a break together. As expected of a well-trained party, everyone stood up and started to search towards the denser areas around the automaton's formation. Yi Si purposely didn't go in the northeast direction, but she instead went in the opposite direction. Since she was the one who suggested the problem, people would be suspicious if she was also the one who found the NPC. Just as expected, a party member shouted towards Crimson Millions very soon. "Leader, there's an NPC here." Crimson Millions ran towards that party member as soon as he heard him. Yi Si didn't follow him but instead walked to the front of automaton formation and sat down. The NPC would come here later anyway. After talking to the NPC for what seemed like half a day, that little gnome finally came towards Yi Si while cursing. "You damn big fellows. Can't you see that I was trying to hide? I'm on a mission B that my boss gave to me, but it's only to watch these traitors but not defeat them." Yi Si laughed. This gnome NPC was still the same as ever. What could he possibly see crouching among such dense and tall grasses? "I'm telling you all that I'm only helping you out this time because of the money. If you guys fail, don't come looking for me. I have my own principle." The little gnome took out some tools from somewhere and then instructed the players to push out some cannon emplacements that looked no different than trash from the bushes. As an old saying goes, a little body often harbors a great soul. Although the gnomes were small in stature, they were the best experts in machineries and their race specialized in engineering and alchemy. In just a short moment, the little gnome had repaired all 3 cannon emplacements. "Just these. These are all I'll offer to help fix." The little gnome jumped down from the last cannon emplacement that he repaired and returned to his place of hiding. He was the key to clearing this dungeon because there were many monsters in the automaton's formation. There was no way to clear them out in one go other than relying on these cannon emplacements. But even so, the shells of the cannon emplacement were limited. Only a total of 6 rounds were prepared for the 3 cannon emplacements. This was also where the difficulty of the dungeon lied. If the 6 rounds of shells couldn't kill all 81 automatons, then many dark gnomes would immediately appear from the stone tower to repair these automatons. After 10 seconds, these automatons would all be fully repaired and continue their assault at the players. By that time, the dungeon would pretty much be considered a failure. In the process of this challenge, many parties were stuck here. They either couldn't kill all the automatons or tried to kill them all with brute force but got annihilated in the end instead. After the 3 cannon emplacements were set up, Crimson Millions started assigning members to get on them. One of them was Traceless Aftermaths and the other was a rogue by the name of Grim Moon. Just when Crimson Millions was pondering about the candidate for the last cannon emplacement, Yi Si took the initiative to volunteer. "Leader, can I have a go at it?" People immediately started whispering at her self-nomination. Yi Si's performance was exceptional, and she had impressed others even more after entering the dungeon. But even so, this was the first time they had worked together as a team, so compared to others, most people weren't too familiar with her, so they'd naturally worry about leaving such an important task in her hands. Needless to say, Crimson Millions had also thought about this. But in the end, he decided to take the risk. He was curious to see how capable this huntress, Gongxia, was. So he gave her a nod as he ignored the distrust of other party members and assigned the last cannon emplacement to Yi Si. "Everyone has 2 rounds of shells. Aim to kill as many of them as possible, don't waste any of the shells. The more automatons you kill, the less pressure for us at the back." Crimson Millions briefed the 3 of them and let them get on to the cannons. As soon as he saw the 3 of them had mounted the cannon, he spoke again. "At the count of 3, fire." Before Crimson Millions could even finish his sentence, he heard the sharp noise of the feathers on the tip of an arrow rustling in the air as it flew towards the automaton formation. 1742, the automatons immediately dashed towards the attacker's direction. Crimson Millions was shocked at the sudden turn of events as he turned around to the initiator immediately and shouted angrily. "Gongxia, what are you doing? Are you trying to get us all killed?" Although Crimson Millions was extremely pissed off right now, he couldn't afford to waste his time cursing at Yi Si. He hurriedly ordered the party to retreat. For a moment, the whole party was in chaos. Like a headless chicken, they had lost their bearings. The whole party channel was filled with curses directed towards Yi Si and complaints towards Crimson Millions. It was so noisy that it was irritating. Grim Moon had already jumped off from the cannon emplacement at the side and joined the fleeing team. Traceless Aftermaths jumped off from the cannon emplacement too and was about to escape with the others. But then he lifted his head and saw Yi Si was still standing on the cannon emplacement with a calm face. An inexplicable calmness emerged in his heart. But even so, he still called out to her frantically. "Gongxi, hurry up and go." Yi Si still remained silent as she stood on the cannon emplacement. She readjusted her angle without caring about the rest. She didn't even bother about Crimson Millions' anger and the other party members who were already in chaos. When the automatons rushed to a specific spot, bang, a noise was heard as the explosive was launched out. "Pass me a shell." Before the shell was sent flying, Yi Si's hand was already extended towards Traceless Aftermaths. Traceless Aftermaths was a little baffled, but his body actually reacted faster than his brain as the next moment as he quickly picked up another shell from the ground and passed it to Yi Si with lightning speed. Yi Si skillfully loaded it before launching it out. The first shell landed exactly at the spot where most automatons were gathered. A crowd of red figures flashed by, followed by a dense smoke and fire sparks flying astray. A comm system announcement was made monotonously in the party channel. Gongxia has shot down 67 automatons and achieved a combo of 157. Yi Si then launched another shell. The system announcement rang out again. Gongxia has shot down 73 automatons and achieved a combo of 189. Traceless Aftermaths stood there, completely dumbfounded. What in the world? She's that fierce. Shell. Yi Si shifted her gaze to Traceless Aftermaths, who was standing there dumbly as she extended her hand to him again. Roger. Traceless Aftermaths quickly placed another shell in her hand without any doubt this time. Gongxi has shot down 81 automatons and achieved a combo of 234. After that, everyone unlocked the Berserk Destroyer achievement. There was quite a few achievements unlockable in the automatons formation. The Destroyer was the lowest, so any party that could defeat 81 automatons before all the 6 shells were used up would be able to unlock this achievement. However, if 81 automatons could be defeated with 3 shells or less without suffering any damage, then the Berserk Destroyer achievement would be unlocked. If only 2 shells were used, then the Violent Destroyer achievement would be unlocked. If only 1 shell was used, then the Bane of the Automatons achievement would be unlocked. Yi Si was extremely dissatisfied with this result. She was someone who could slay 81 automatons with a single shell consecutively for 50 times in her previous life and was awarded the Terminator, thus leaving behind a glorious record in Fate. Seemed like she had gotten so rusty that she needed 3 shells to get them all. Despite Yi Si's dissatisfaction, the rest were already speechless. The people who were able to join the second squadron were not ordinary players and they could basically be considered elites. After getting annihilated the last time, they already knew how difficult it was to kill all these automatons with cannon shells. With such a massive amount of them, 6 shells might not even be enough, yet this huntress before them was able to take care of everything with just 3 shells. Of course, some refused to accept it and were planning to come try again once the dungeon had been reset tomorrow, but none of this mattered anymore. Crimson Millions was rendered speechless at this too as he walked to the side of the cannon emplacement and saw Yi Si who had just jumped off from it. He stared at her and finally spoke after a long while. "You've come to this dungeon before." Yi Si chuckled as she gave away a half-truth, "I was a sniper on Fire Shooter Online before." But Crimson Millions still had a lot of doubts. Could she be a beta player? Or she was somehow related to the core team of Fate? Or could this be the side account of one of the GMs? The guesses and doubts could go on forever, but the reason that Yi Si gave seemed to be the most plausible one. "About the things I've said." Crimson Millions felt a little embarrassed when he suddenly remembered about what he had said in his anger. He scratched his head and was thinking of apologizing to Yi Si, but then again he felt a little reluctant to do it. After mumbling to himself for a bit, he told her firmly again, "You should have listened to the orders just now. We were able to clear with this stroke of luck, but if we were unlucky." Yi Si laughed again and interrupted his lecture. "I'm sorry. It's been a while since I last touched anything with a scope, so I got excited." Chapter 45 Automaton Formation. First 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Even though Yi Si had spoken to her in such a way, she didn't show any trace of remorse. It wasn't that she was seeking the limelight this time, but if these cannons were to be fired by 3 people simultaneously, they'd need extremely good coordination to kill their enemies in one attack. However, if their teamwork was poor, they could easily cause the 80.1 automatons to scatter, and with the automatons split up, a team wipe wouldn't be too far off. Yi Si couldn't say that Grim Moon and Traceless Aftermaths had poor coordination, but her own personal coordination with the two was definitely poor. Rather than wait for the team to blame it on her arrogance when their uncoordinated team was wiped out, it was better for her to take care of everything herself. Crimson Millions couldn't bring himself to believe what Yi Si had said. But since she'd already given them an explanation, it would be bad for him to pry any further. He was only able to nod awkwardly and said to the other party members, "Press forward, towards the stone tower." Cannonballs rained down on them, the stone towers, but after several party members had been sacrificed, the rest of them figured out the way to dodge the cannonballs. They managed to easily destroy the cannon emplacements within 20 minutes. These foolish mortals have trespassed into the machine world. Number 48 is angry. The invaders made up of flesh and blood are to be annihilated. An ear-piercing sound of metal creaking resounded through the area. Thus the battle against the reanimated automaton number 48 began. With the most difficult part of the automaton formation taken care of, it was relatively easy to defeat the boss. A tank with decent skills was all that was needed to accomplish the job. The MT of the second squadron was barely qualified for the job. Despite nearly dying several times, he'd survived thanks to the 5 healers they had in the party. After a tough battle that lasted about half an hour, automaton number 48 was finally defeated. The system notified them the moment automaton number 48 had been defeated. Congratulations to Steel-Blooded Battle Spear Guild for completing the first kill of the automaton formation dungeon. Rewards: 300 Guild Prestige Points, 5,000 Global Main City Prestige Points, 1,000 Gold. Let us remember their names. Congratulations on clearing the automaton formation dungeon, Crimson Millions. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points, 1 Talent Point. Achievements: Automaton Formation First 5. Congratulations on clearing the automaton formation dungeon, Traceless Aftermaths. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points, 1 Talent Point. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. Congratulations on clearing the automaton formation dungeon, Seductive Dance. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points, 1 Talent Point. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. Congratulations on clearing the automaton formation dungeon, Gongziyu. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points, 1 Talent Point. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. The party was initially stunned when they heard the announcement. After they overcame their brief shock, they hugged each other tightly, and erupted with cheers. Yi Xi, who was standing to the side, also felt excited after witnessing their excitement. However, she didn't betray any emotions, as she still didn't have any sense of belonging. Gongzi, cheer up. Out of the blue, a person gave Yi Xi a tight hug and slapped her on the back. I'm so happy that we were able to get a first blood. I didn't think I'd ever get one. It was Traceless Aftermaths. Yi Xi's back hurt from the continued slaps she received. However, she was influenced by Traceless Aftermath joy, and didn't stop him. She instead imitated his actions, and slapped him on the back as well. Yi Xi couldn't help but think of the first ever first blood she'd gotten in her past life. The ecstasy that had come from the deepest part of her heart, the sheer excitement that had caused her to spread her arms wide and spin around in circles, screaming loudly as she spun, venting her joy. Even though it was a long time ago, even though she'd been reborn, even though she'd achieved countless first bloods, her blood still boiled from the excitement. There were billions of players in the game. To be the first to clear a dungeon amongst countless other people was certainly a glorious and exciting feat. However, Crimson Millions was probably the happiest amongst them. He was usually a relatively reserved person, but his current behavior was in direct contrast to his usually calm self. He hugged each and every party member, his eyes red with emotion. He probably would have cried out had nobody else been around. The players present couldn't hold back their excitement, thus their joy lasted for quite some time. Crimson Millions walked to the fallen boss and took a deep breath before he looted it. There were players from both the Black Hand 1 army and the Red Hand 2 army. Yi Xi was from the Black Hand army, while Crimson Millions was from the Red Hand army. A long list of items appeared. The rewards were much more plentiful than normal because this was the first blood. Being one of the first 5 parties to clear the dungeon had lucrative benefits. After the 5 spots had been taken, no more additional rewards would be given out. The average loot dropped would be 3 to 4 pieces of equipment, along with some miscellaneous items. However, they'd received 14 pieces of equipment, along with 4 skill books, and a huge amount of various items. As an unspoken rule, the MT, the healer that had healed the most, and the DPS that had dealt the most damage, all had the privilege of taking precedence when it came to equipment distribution. Seductive Dance was usually the top DPS, but his place had been taken by Yi Xi. She alone had dealt a staggering 1.7 million damage in the dungeon. Seductive Dance, who was in second place, had only dealt around 1 million points of damage total. The difference in their total damage dealt was just too great. Seductive Dance was impressed after when he saw Yi Xi's mechanical skills and ability to adapt. He was opened-up minded, and knew that he wasn't as good as Yi Si. His could only work hard and improve himself. He hoped that he could, one day, clear a dungeon with this huntress again, and compete against her. Yi Si examined the equipment closely, and realized that none of them were ideal for her, even though there were a few that could be worn by professions related to agility, so Yi Si gave up on choosing any of the equipment. Instead, she aimed for the multi-arrow skill book that she'd seen when she was first looking over the rewards. At that time, she'd decided that she'd give up on everything else, just to get this skill book. The multi-arrow skill book wasn't considered rare, but certainly didn't have a high drop rate either, with a 1 in 50-100 chance. The skill book would be dropped from bosses between level 20 and level 50, but with many new players playing as the hunter class, the multi-arrow skill book was still considered a valuable item. Before Yi Si had reincarnated, a multi-arrow skill book could be auctioned for up to 10,000 gold coins. This was why Yi Si had picked the skill book without any hesitation. The multi-arrow skill was one of very few hunter skills capable of dealing damage to multiple targets. At its initial stage, multi-arrow would release 3 arrows in a cone shape, dealing damage to any enemies in its path. At LVL 20, multi-arrow would release 48 arrows in a circle around the hunter. It was an overpowered skill. However, the skill could only be leveled up by a specific NPC after it reached LVL 12. As to where that NPC was, only God knew. In her past life, the highest level multi-arrow that she'd encountered had only been LVL 12, which fired arrows out in a 160 degrees cone shape. She could clearly remember her fight against fleeting years from her past life. She'd been defeated by that LVL 12 multi-arrow. Yi Si couldn't help but tear up at that particular memory. You don't want any of the equipment. Just that skill book. Although Crimson Millions had already expected Yi Si to choose the multi-arrow skill book, he was still surprised that she didn't want any of the equipment. No thanks, everyone did their part. I'm content with just this skill book. I don't need anything else. Yi Si shook her head. There was no way that she could tell Crimson Millions that the equipment dropped wasn't as good as her current equipment. Crimson Millions didn't insist on giving Yi Si anything else after witnessing her generosity. He proceeded to distribute the equipment and items amongst the remaining party members. Yi Si's action left a good impression on the other party members. The rogue, ranger, and other hunters expected her to hoard all of the equipment, but she'd unexpectedly only taken a single skill book. Their appreciation towards Yi Si wasn't something that could be described with words. Each of the party members received quite a large amount of loot due to the first blood rewards being as they were. The ones who were able to obtain equipment were happy despite having to deduct the DKP they received, while the others were happy with whatever they got, as they could exchange the guild-rewarded DKP for real-world cash. Everyone was happy. After leaving the dungeon, Yi Si checked the time. It was nearly 3 in the morning. She hurriedly said farewell to Traceless Aftermath, logged out of the game, and went to sleep. The person in charge of the second squadron, Crimson Millions, headed straight to their guild's encampment, and walked into the conference room. The guild conference room was a special room that could only be entered by players invited by the guild leader. Thousand Sunsets and Zero Arsenic were currently watching the recording from the second squadron's first blood. Thousand Sunsets pointed to the part when Yi Si had been aggroing the elite guards and said, "Rewind it, let's watch this part again." Zero Arsenic rewound the video, and the two began to carefully study her movements. Crimson Millions stood there silently for almost an eternity. He then realized that the guild leader and the vice-guild leader were so focused that they hadn't noticed his presence. He could only take the initiative to greet them. "Leader, vice-leader. Crimson, you came." Zero Arsenic greeted him promptly, and told him to sit. Afterwards, he pointed at the recording and smiled. "Have you seen it yourself?" "I was there myself, but I didn't see the whole thing." Crimson Millions walked to the front of the room to see the recording with a strange look on his face that was hard to describe. Thousand Sunsets suddenly asked, "What do you think of her performance?" Translator's notes. 1. Black hand. Very unlucky especially when it comes to looting. 2. Red hand. Yeah, you guessed it. Chapter 46. As long as you shoot properly, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The way an expert commander judges a player is entirely different from the way an average player or even an expert player would. Thousand Sunsets was a very careful person. So even after hearing first-hand accounts from Timely Rain and Zero Arsenic's investigation, even after watching the process of obtaining the first blood in person, as well as studying every single frame of the recording, he still wanted to listen to what Crimson Millions had to say. I'm not talking about her skills, you've already seen it for yourself. There's nothing much to say about it, really. She's simply too good. She has a very good grasp of the situation, and is very adaptable to changes. The video reached the part where Yi Si was firing the cannon. She was quite a brave one. She tends to solve problems in a very bold fashion, and I'm not used to something like that. Thousand Sunsets laughed as well. You were in the army once, and you're still more hesitant than a woman. Crimson Millions was not angry since they had once been comrades in the army. So he could only laugh out loud. Better safe than sorry. That's what you taught us. Zero Arsenic smiled at the two. So, it's decided then. It is. Thousand Sunsets said as he slammed his hand onto the table. With a shocked expression, Crimson Millions said, "Guy, you must be kidding." The duo shook their head. "You are the ones who are truly bold." Crimson Millions muttered as he rolled his eyes. Due to a lack of sleep, Yi Si was currently dozing in class. By the time class ended, she was already slumped over the table. Fang Shu, at the same table as her, started teasing, "What happened to you? Did you secretly go on a date with some guy last night?" Yi Si grinned, "I wish. I just don't have the time for that. I'd spent last night clearing the automaton formation." You guys are tenacious. We've just cleared Cruel Pit recently and you've already started exploring the automaton formation. It must have been quite hard. Fang Shu laughed. We were exploring the same dungeon yesterday. Our party has been annihilated so many times that I'm about to cry. I've heard that we'll explore it again today. I'm almost out of money for repairing my equipment. Cleared it. Yi Si yawned. Ha. Fang Shu's eyeballs popped out of their sockets. She thought she'd misheard what Yi Si had said. Are you serious? Fang Shu pestered Yi Si with questions, but she remained silent. A clear voice then suddenly rang out from outside of the classroom. Shu, it was a very familiar voice. Yi Si raised her head and saw Qin Churuo running towards where she was sitting. Fang Shu's face instantly gained a shade of red when she heard Qin Churuo calling her name, Senior Qin. The two greeted each other and Qin Churuo stated his business. Shu, you're close to that Gongzi, right? Fang Shu subconsciously nodded. You could say that. The first thing I heard after when I arrived in campus today was that Steel-Blooded Battle Spear had cleared the automaton formation last night and won first blood. I also heard that Gongzi Yu was a member of the party that did it. Oh. Despite having already heard the news from Yi Si, Fang Shu was still mildly shocked. She cast a glance at Yi Si, who was unfortunately fast asleep, and completely disregarding the two of them. The forums went crazy. People are asking for Steel-Blooded Battle Spear to release videos of them clearing the dungeon. The guild refused. I just hope you can contact Gongzi Yu and ask if she is willing to help us out. About that. Fang Shu stole another glance at Yi Si. She wanted to tell Qin Churuo that Gongzi Yu was right there, but this was something she was not allowed to do. She could only reply vaguely, I'll try to get in touch with her. Qin Churuo let out a breath he'd been holding. After a brief conversation, he left the classroom and invited Fang Shu to come and clear the dungeon at night. Did you hear that, Yi Si? Hurry up and tell me how to do it. Fang Shushu immediately grabbed hold of Yi Si's hand and started begging for answers as soon as Qin Churuo left the classroom. Yi Si looked at Fang Shushu with half-opened eyes, and paused briefly before saying, "Just tell him to shoot properly." 1. Fang Shushu's face immediately reddened. After confirming that Yi Si had not pulling her leg, she noted down Yi Si's word in all seriousness. When Fang Shushu relayed this to him that night, Qin Churuo also felt puzzled by Yi Si's words. By the time Yi Si logged into the game, it was already 5 in the afternoon. The first message in her mailbox was from Lu Chang. It told Yi Si in a gossiping tone, "Little Si, I have some news for you." Yi Si was never interested in gossips. Even if she did not hear any of it, it didn't matter. She would never be as inquisitive as Lu Chang. "What is it?" Yi Si responded absent-mindedly, while she was crafting some arrows. "Dong Yin has a boyfriend," said Lu Chang with a mischievous smile. "She's almost 19, it's normal to have a boyfriend, why are you acting as if you're her mother?" "Yes, that isn't so strange. But, do you know who her boyfriend is?" This wasn't very interesting to Yi Si. A friend's boyfriend was none of her concern. She asked, her interest waning, "Well, who is it?" "You'll be surprised." "It's He Xiao," said Lu Chang slowly, word by word. Yi Si's hands immediately froze. She could see that Dong Yin liked Thousand Sunsets, but she never thought that things would work out between those two. Yi Si resumed her arrow crafting after a moment's pause. "Is Thousand treating her well?" "He is, according to Dong Yin." Lu Chang laughed and wanted to continue discussing the topic with Yi Si, but eventually gave up due to her lack of interest. Steel, blood battle spears. 2 first bloods in a row was like a ripple on a calm surface that rocked its entire fate. Its influence continued to grow, along with its fame. The guild that was already considered a black horse once again captured everyone's attention, and more players came to join the guild. The leadership of the guild was extremely busy. Within the short span of 5 days, the guild had grown a lot. And its members increased by a staggering additional 5,000. Yi Si had a lot of free time since she hadn't been pressed into service to explore the new dungeons. She had the choice to go and clear some smaller dungeons on hard difficulty or just level up in the normal dungeons. Her days were simple, but satisfying. After several days' hard work, Yi Si finally reached LVL 18, she was catching up to the let_go_of_that_ girl who was in the leaderboards. She received a message from Gleaming Sunshine as she was leveling up in a dungeon. "Little Si, what are you doing?" "I'm leveling up." "What's up?" Yi Si noticed that it was a message from Dong Yin, and with her conversation with Lu Chang from earlier, Yi Si's instincts told her that it was Thousand's idea to have Dong Yin approach her. It was as Yi Si expected. After a short conversation with Yi Si, Dong Yin's revealed his intention. "Can you please come to the guild conference room?" she continued after a brief pause. "Thousand wants to talk to you." "Okay." Yi Si let loose a few arrows, ending the life of a monster in front of her, then prepared to return to the guild encampment. The encampment was bustling with players, but all of them were new faces. Most were members who had just joined the guild. Of course, with thousands of members in the guild, there were also veterans who Yi Si has never even seen before. Yi Si knocked on the door of the conference room, and was immediately transported into the room. It was her first time in a guild's conference room. Despite being a top .10 sorceress in her past life, her despicable character meant that no guild would ever accept her. So this was an entirely new experience for her. A long table was situated in the middle of the conference room that could easily fit 100 players. It was identical to those dining tables used by the European aristocrats. Thousand Sunsets sat at the host's seat at the end of the table. Gleaming Sunshine was seated on his right. Only 3 players, including Yi Si, was present in the conference room. Gleaming Sunshine immediately greeted Yi Xi upon seeing her. Her face was a slight shade of red, her eyebrows moist, and she appeared to be in a good mood. It was all thanks to the quality production of Fate. Even the player's mood could be portrayed on his or her character with a 95% accuracy. This allowed a player's emotion to be conveyed to the people around the player. Thousand Sunsets sent a friend invite to Yi Xi, which she did not reject. She nodded at Gleaming Sunshine and took a seat opposite Thousand Sunsets. She spoke, neither servile nor overbearing, "What do you need from me?" Thousand Sunsets remained silent. Gleaming Sunshine stood up and said to Yi Xi, "I'll take my leave." Thousand Sunsets nodded and smiled at her, "Let's go leveling up together later." Gleaming Sunshine was happy. Her face reddened even further. She lowered her head and left hurriedly. She was so happy that she even forgotten to greet Yi Xi on her way out. Yi Xi studied the interaction between Gleaming Sunshine and Thousand Sunsets, feeling slight uncomfortable. Thousand Sunsets slowly spoke after Gleaming Sunshine left the room, "Gongzi, I've heard that you played before. Otherworld OL." Yi Xi tilted her head. For an average person, Otherworld OL was one of the most popular video games before Fate's open beta, and it was 2 months since Fate was launched. But for Yi Xi, it was something she had done 10 years ago. And her memories of that game had already faded by this time. Translator's note. 1. Shoot properly. Literally translated as, firing the cannon, is a slang for having sex. So the author was making a naughty sexual joke here XD. Chapter 47 In command of the 1st Squadron. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Receiving no reply from Yi Xi, Thousand Sunsets assumed her silence was due to a lack of trust. And so he smiled and said, "I'm just asking. It's okay if you don't feel comfortable answering." Yi Xi stared at Thousand Sunsets. She knew he had misunderstood her silence. But she merely nodded and didn't try to offer an explanation. "May I know your name in Underworld OL?" Thousand Sunsets cautiously asked after seeing Yi Xi respond. This was an especially hard question for Yi Xi. For her, that memory was from a time long, long ago. Even back when she'd been famous in Otherworld, it hadn't necessarily meant that she remembered everything that had happened at that time. She tilted her head, and racked her brain before shifting her gaze over to Thousand Sunsets, and replied, uncertainty evident in her eyes, "I think it's Oceanic Lantern." Her voice was soft, so much so that Thousand Sunsets missed the uncertainty within her voice. Yet the name itself still managed to stir up his emotions. He was also a former player of Otherworld, and was familiar with the name Oceanic Lantern since it was quite renowned. She was a sorceress with top-notch skills and an unprecedented position. Although she appeared immature in some ways, it was an undeniable fact that Oceanic Lantern was one of the best sorceress in the entire Otherworld. Thousand Sunsets had already learned from Zero Arsenic that Yi Xi was Oceanic Lantern. But he'd had his doubts. Despite being skillful, Oceanic Lantern was immature and somewhat impatient. She'd never been as ruthless or efficient as Gongzi Yu was. Besides, Oceanic Lantern was a difficult person to interact with. She was rebellious, cold, and selfish. The direct opposite of what people claimed Gongzi Yu was. So as a guild leader who needed to always stay cautious, Thousand Sunsets felt he needed to make a final confirmation that Yi Xi was indeed the famous Oceanic Lantern. A hint of surprise flashed past his eyes, but he quickly took hold of his emotion. He then smiled and went on to say, "I always thought that Oceanic Lantern was someone older, but it turns out you're the same age as Yin Yin." The nickname Thousand Sunsets had given Dong Yin caused Yi Xi to cringe. She was curious about Thousand Sunsets' intention. He'd had Dong Yin contact Yi Xi and then talk to her about the game Otherworld. What was he hoping to achieve by doing this? Regardless, Yi Xi still remained silent. In the past 10 years, Yi Xi had learned a valuable lesson. In the process of making a deal, one must always let one's opponent be the one getting the ball rolling. The calmer you were, the more distressed your counterpart would be. With that, Yi Si merely laughed and stared at Thousand Sunsets. Thousand Sunsets knew that Yi Si was only 18 years old. It was an age where people tend to be fickle and immature, and their thoughts could easily be grasped. They would usually be placated by a few praises. Despite this, he was still unable to figure out Gongzi Yu's thoughts. She was not as naive as Dong Yin and Yi Tsang, nor was she as impulsive as Lu Chang. She was calm like water, both silent and unmoving. It was as if her silence could swallow everything he tried to throw her way. Thousand Sunsets' current situation was the perfect example of this. Even after praising Yi Si for her exploits in Otherworld OL, she remained unmoved. She merely kept on silently gazing at him, as if those things had nothing to do with her. Thousand Sunsets lost his patience. He was trying to be friendly and intimate to Yi Si, and with that he could take the opportunity to show her some favors and ensure that she would stay in the guild and remain loyal to it. He did not expect Yi Si to do nothing but smile and silently gaze at him. The conversation immediately turned into a one-sided dialogue. Yi Si couldn't help but yawn after realizing that she had wasted almost an hour in this room. Thousand Sunsets was able to maintain his composure. Must Yi Si compromise and give him what he wanted? Well, sorry to disappoint, she wasn't planning on doing so. Yi Si stood up and said, "Guild leader, I have a friend asking me for help in clearing a dungeon. If you have nothing else to say, I'll be taking my leave." Yi Si turned around and was about to leave without saying anything else. But Thousand Sunsets could not longer hold himself back. "Gongzi, I have something else to say. Please hold on." "What is it? Is it about Otherworld OL?" Yi Si turned around, seemingly sneering at him. "No," Thousand Sunset let out a sigh. He really felt helpless now. This little girl was quite good, since she was able to force his hand. "No, it's not that. The guild would like to nominate you as the vice commander of the guild battle command." He sent a trade request to Yi Si, which containing a virtual account. "You'll be paid a salary of 10,000 renminbi per month through this account. Of course, there will be other bonuses as well. All you need to do is to help us clear the dungeons. You'll be offered lots of rewards if you're able to secure the first 5 for our guild." 10,000 renminbi was a large sum for an 18-years-old girl. So Thousand Sunset's intention had been made very clear. Was he trying to buy her loyalty? Yi Si narrowed her eyes. Steel, blooded battle, spear would definitely take the opportunity to boost their public image if Yi Si were to accept this offer. The guild would definitely reveal her identity as Oceanic Lantern in the forums. Even when she hadn't been the best player, she'd still been the only female player to be crowned as the top 10 experts of the game. If Steel, Blooded Battle Spear used this fact to promote their guild, they would easily be able to increase their fame. And with so many first blood being secured by Oceanic Lantern, the sheer benefit. Only idiots would not able to understand the reasoning behind it. Yi Si remained unmoved by Thousand Sunset's offer. She hated being used by someone else. Besides, she could not guarantee that she would be staying in Steel, Blooded Battle Spear forever. Why would she sell herself out for something so trivial? Was she worth so little? "I don't like to be in a position of power. I also don't want a salary. I'm just playing for fun. Money is not really something important to me." She smiled slightly, and declined Thousand Sunset's offer without hesitation. Which left Thousand Sunset slightly embarrassed. "If you need my help in clearing dungeons, I will of course do my best." At that point, Thousand Sunsets had given up trying to appear courteous. "Then go clear the automaton formation with the first squadron." He paused, then continued, "You'll be put in charge." Yi Si nodded her head. "You think highly of me. I'll try my best." Yi Si left the conference room, and Zero Arsenic stepped into the room a moment after. "How did it go?" Thousand Sunsets creased his eyebrows and sighed, I'm beginning to doubt that she's only 18. She too cunning. I can't take advantage of her. Zero Arsenic raised his eyebrow as Thousand Sunsets continued, she refused to be a battle commander, but she did not oppose to the idea of being a party leader. What about that thing about Otherworld? Zero Arsenic's eyebrows also began to crease. She almost did not say a word. I was F*King talking to myself like some sort of ape. Zero Arsenic played the voice recording he set up in the conference room beforehand. He listened for a short moment and sighed, her voice is so unclear, we can't possibly use it to publicize the fact that Oceanic Lantern is now in our guild. Thousand Sunsets grimaced, let's just forget about it, and stop thinking of using such things to publicize our guild. It's flashy but it ain't useful. As long as our guild is able to progress well in terms of dungeon clearing, we will gain popularity anyways. Yi Si had managed to guess that Thousand Sunsets wanted to use her, but she hadn't expected them to even go so far as to record her voice. At 6 p.m. on the second day, Yi Si punctually went online and led the already formed party into the Automaton Formation dungeon. Since the second squadron had already cleared the dungeon, the members of the first squadron had gotten wind that the huntress with the unprecedented performance would be the one who led their party into the dungeon. Some of them rejected her and so kept a distance. This was human nature. It was clearly shown when they chose to keep a distance from Yi Si. Yi Si did not mind at all. Her job was to help them clear the dungeon. She was not there for camaraderie. To take command of a party was not something new for Yi Si. She had experience doing so in her past life. Due to certain reasons however, no guild had been willing to accept her. It had been a while since she had to take charge of a group of players, which made her feel quite nervous. She regained her composure after a short time. Yi Si's style of commanding was both simple and concise. She would only repeat something twice, and her style relied heavily on the cohesion of the entire party. One would need to expend a considerable amount of energy to focus on her words and also needed very good teamwork. The first squadron was not used to Yi Si's style. Added up to their initial rejection of Yi Si, they were unable to bring out their full potential. So everything erupted into chaos when they were fighting against the elite guards and 3 tanks instantly died from an ultimate skill from a monster. The 4th and 5th tank were unable to follow up and the failure of the healers to control the aggro caused the aggro to go OT, which caused dozens of players to die within seconds. The party channel was flooded with grumbling, complaints, and even curses. They were regretting not being able to kill Yi Si to vent their frustration and anger. Chapter 48 First Squadron, First 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this moment, Yi Si was able to hold back the elite guard with her exceptional adaptability and her fantastic mechanical skill. She kited to death in an extravagant fashion while the party just watched. At this point, those who were still filled with indignance were finally accepted Yi Si. An elite guard that would usually take 25 players to take down was defeated by her alone. If this news got out, it would be an embarrassment for them. The party members revived themselves and ate some supplies to recover their health. They no longer gossiped about Yi Si. Her actions earlier were like a slap to their faces. Yi Si sat on a rock at the side, patting OL3's head. She quietly scanned the crowd with an icy gaze. The group of 24 players were all scared witless by her stare. It was only after a while that some of the more courageous players finally asked, "Leader, do we still push onwards?" Yi Si's intimidating gaze immediately swept over the few who were still chattering. Those she stared at were all frightened and no longer dared to speak. The world was just like that, if you wanted others to obey you, a few flowery words would not be enough. The most direct method would be to let the other party know of your valiance. Then they will automatically submit to you. I know that you might think that I do not have the capabilities to lead you guys. However, I'm only here to clear this dungeon. Your thoughts are none of my concern. Yi Si said in an icy, unsympathetic tone. The moment she said this, one of the players who were discontented with Yi Si immediately spoke out, "Who do you think you are? You don't speak clearly, you don't give us many pointers, and you expect us to clear the dungeon. What do you think we are? Demigods." Yi Si glanced sideways at the player, then she stood up with a gentle expression and spoke in an indifferent tone, "The elites of steel. Blooded battle spear can't even do their job with a change in commander." Although this sentence was as light as the feather of a goose, its impact however was as heavy as that of Mount Tai, causing all of the players to turn red with anger. In reality, Yi Si had already clearly explained the method to clear the dungeon right at the start. In between, she had given relevant heads up at the appropriate times. However, the real issue was that they were not used to being given such efficient commands. Additionally, they were not really willing to follow Yi Si's orders, therefore they weren't able to display the full extent of their abilities. This was a matter that nobody wanted to admit. It was without doubt that they would rather push all the blame to Yi Si, this outsider. Turning around, Yi Si ignored the angry rants of those behind and said tranquilly, "Those who don't wish to fight can choose to retreat, those who wish to fight can just continue." Instantly, she heard consecutive sounds from the system notifications. "Random Dance of the Sakuras has left your party. Only 1m4 has left your party. Strange Differences has left your party." After the sound from the system notifications stopped, Yi Si glanced around at the players left. There were roughly 10 players who left, not a lot but not very little either. There were only 15 players left. The remaining players who stayed back comprised of those that were completely convinced of her strength, those that were simply not resigned to giving up after such a long fight, and those who wanted to earn DKP. The MT and secondary tank had left the party, while the main healer stayed behind along with the third and fourth healer. Some of the DPS left as well. The party only had half its strength left. The main healer was a woman of few words. She had excellent equipment and a good character. She was originally skeptical of Yi Si. However, after witnessing Yi Si's outstanding performance, she made the choice to follow Yi Si's lead and clear the dungeon since the huntress was willing to continue pressing forwards. Despite that, she was still discouraged by the desertion of a portion of the party members. "Leader, do we still continue?" Yi Si studied the cleric named Cherry Blossom and smiled, "Let's go, carry on." She then shouted into the command channel, "Steam, you're now the MT, don't panic, and just do what you would normally do. If the healers does not OT, Steam will be alright. As for the DPS, just dish out the highest damage possible." Yi Si's words alarmed Steam, who was only the third tank. His equipment was not as good as the MT, and he did not have much experience. His palms began sweating after hearing Yi Si's, "Leader, I'm afraid that I can't control the aggro." "It's okay. There's only one rule. All the DPS can only attack the monster being engaged by the tank." The requirement set by Yi Si was as low as possible. It was the basic task of any DPS player. However, the DPS players were afraid. Was it payback for their insubordination? Was she trying to get the party annihilated? Despite that, there was a golden rule that the party leader was the highest authority in a dungeon. The DPS players could only obey Yi Si's command and dish out as much damage as possible. Strangely, none of them seemed to have the problem of OT. No matter how much damage they've dealt, their aggro did not exceed the value of their tank. The DPS players began gossiping among themselves, "That's weird, I had to hold back when it was the MT. We'd even OT if we're not careful. Why did we not OT just now?" The reason was simple. Yi Si had been lazing off earlier. But with so many party members deserting, she had to put her back into the task and dish out damage to make up for the lack of numbers. Her aggro immediately exceeded everybody in the party. But with her decoy skill that has a 10-second CD, she was able to transfer her aggro to the tank every now and then. It was impossible for the others to OT. Other than that, the DPS players soon discovered that the damage output of YCI, which had always been mediocre, was higher than every one of them and was rising rapidly. Despite the fact that the dungeon was filled with elite monsters, YCI could still deal enormous amounts of damage to the mob. The remaining 14 party members of the first squadron could not believe themselves when they reached the automaton formation. Despite being slower in terms of progress, their survivability had greatly increased. YCI located the related NPC, set up the cannon emplacement, and instructed the remainder of the party members to take a rest. She left Steam to pass her the ammunitions of the cannon. By now, the group's trust towards YCI had become incomparably firm. Although they had been annihilated several times in this part of the dungeon, they still had confidence. They believed that as long as Gong Ziyu was with them, the automaton formation would be nothing. Even when she was facing the automaton formation alone, the party believed firmly that they would be able to make it. YCI delivered. After attracting the attention of the mob with some arrows, YCI bombarded the formation with the cannon. The results were better than that time with the second squadron. She was able to annihilate the entire automaton formation with 2 shots. The entire process lasted less than 30 seconds, and the 15 party members all received the achievement, Berserk Destroyer. Cheers erupted among the party. They could not believe their eyes. The problem that had hindered their progress for days had been solved in a flash. YCI was the center of attention. Many of the party members offered her hugs. YCI, who was not used to such intimate social interaction, felt overwhelmed. Her face reddened. She waved her hands and said, "It's too early to celebrate. Do it when we clear the dungeon." With high morale, the party continued their advance. With the automaton formation defeated, they did not face any more difficulties. They had a minor setback in the fight against automaton number 48 because the equipment of their tank were not on par, and there were several occasions where he was nearly killed. However, he was able to survive with the help of Cherry Blossom and the other 2 healers. Finally, they were able to clear the dungeon. The moment automaton number 48 was defeated, the system message began to flood the channel. Congratulations, Gong Ziyu, for clearing the automaton formation dungeon. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. Congratulations, Cherry Blossom, for clearing the automaton formation dungeon. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. Congratulations, Steam, for clearing the automaton formation dungeon. Rewards: 100 Black Rock City Prestige Points. Achievement: Automaton Formation First 5. The remaining 14 members of the first squadron showed the same reaction as the second squadron when they cleared the dungeon. They screamed in joy. Even when they were unable to get the first kill, they still managed to achieve the second place of the first 5 since no other guilds were able to clear the dungeon yet in the past few days. Additionally, they did it with only 15 members in their party. Facing the excitement from her party members, YCI originally planned to just hide in a corner and hope to slip away undetected. However, she was found and the group tossed her into the air repeatedly. As the group was celebrating in the dungeon, regret welled in the 10 deserters who had gathered in the guild conference room. They were embarrassed when Zero Arsenic laughed and said to them, "You guys lack patience." The deserters were the ones who had asked for a live broadcast of the dungeon clearing process. Although they had difficulties with the first few monsters they encountered, the party with only 15 members remaining was able to reform itself into a formidable fighting machine under YCI's command. The 10 were especially surprised when YCI was able to defeat the automaton formation. Their hatred and distaste against YCI turned into endless regrets. Flawless Reflection cringed after Steel-Blooded Battle Spear grabbed another spot of the first 5 for the automaton formation dungeon. He felt pained as he looked at automaton number 48 who was at the end of its life. They were very close in defeating the boss. Although they were also featured in the system announcement, the attention they garnered was not as much as Steel, Blooded Battle Spear. After all, Steel, Blooded Battle Spear was able to achieve first 5 twice. The boss was looted by Steam. His luck was quite good. Although their loot was not as much as the second squadron, they were still able to obtain 3 skill books and 11 equipments. ECI received an equipment and skill book after the spoils were distributed. The entire party was overwhelmed with joy. Upon exiting the dungeon, ECI sent a message to Thousand Sunsets. Despite being offered numerous rewards by Thousand Sunsets, ECI insisted upon receiving only DKP. She then immediately went offline. Hi guys. I've set up my Patreon. Yano cough cough, if anybody wants to throw in some monies $$ for Jimmy cough cough. Chapter 49 Winter Hot Spring. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In both lives that Yeesees had lived, Steel, Blooded Battle Spear had always been a black horse. The only difference this time was that a black horse usually only appeared in the later part of the game. Totally unlike what was happening in Yeesee's current life, where they had presented themselves as the black horse only 2 to 3 months after the game had started. They've managed to take 2 of the 5 automaton formation first 5, and have become the focus of every player. They received all sorts of requests on the forums to reveal the dungeon clearing video. They've also gotten a lot of new applicants. Within a few days Steel, Blooded Battle Spear had become one of the most popular guilds within the Eastern continent. Even with her remarkable performance while taking command of the first squadron, her simple and concise style of command was rejected by the more conservative veteran players. However, this did not affect Thousand Sunsets' desire to rope in ECI. So from that time on, ECI had become the only player to enjoy such extreme freedom in a guild that formerly had such a highly militarized management system. She could literally do anything she wanted. Although not many had knowledge of such arrangement, those who knew of it were extremely dissatisfied. Peacock Blue being one of them. Thousand, you can't do this. She'll destroy the order in our guild. Thousand Sunsets ignored Peacock Blue's objection. He already knew that his action of letting ECI roam freely might affect the other guild members. But after considering the fact that ECI was somewhat of a loner, this influence was actually quite limited. With that in mind, Thousand Sunsets had chosen to not restrict EC's movements. She is only here to help take charge of our dungeon clearing team. We don't have to care about the rest. Thousand Sunsets said and dismissed Peacock Blue. Peacock Blue stormed out of the conference room in anger, then ran into Zero Arsenic. They had been friends for many years, and Zero Arsenic was concerned after witnessing her anger. Peacock Blue immediately spilled her thoughts about Gongziyu. She's merely a huntress, but Thousand allows her so much freedom just because she's a friend of Lefty. Zero Arsenic patted her shoulder. You know that she's Oceanic Lantern, right? So what? This is fate, not Otherworld. Everybody should be treated the same. Why does she receive such special treatment? Peacock Blue couldn't help but feel wronged, her tone filled with a hint of bitterness. What's so good about her that she attracts Thousand's attention? Zero Arsenic knew that Peacock Blue held some feelings towards Thousand Sunsets. He laughed. Hey, Gleaming Sunshine is the one who is his girlfriend, not Gongziyu. It's unfair that you're angry at her because of this. Noticing that Zero Arsenic saw through her thoughts, Peacock Blue was embarrassed and angry. I don't care. I just think that with such example, it'll be hard to keep the other guild members in line. With that, she ran away. Zero Arsenic could only let out a long sigh. As an administrator, Peacock Blue was quite narrow-minded. Despite her exceptional administrative skills, she'd failed to see that Gongziyu would greatly aid in the growth of their guild. Zero Arsenic, of course, did not inform Thousand Sunsets of Peacock Blue's tantrum. In the following days, Thousand Sunsets did not give any more assignments to ECI. He spent most of his time in the automaton formation dungeon, practicing the method of clearing the dungeon by studying EC's video. Despite having 2 of its squadron having first 5, Steel, blooded battle spear still owed these achievements to Yi Xi. Thousand Sunsets had always been careful. Even if he wanted to rope Yi Xi in, she was after all someone he still couldn't fully trust. It was only appropriate for someone who is a core member to master the way to clear a dungeon with such a high difficulty. The elites of the squadrons, especially those who'd originally played first-person shooter games, were all required to practice firing the cannon. Despite it appearing easy, the players quickly learned that it was a difficult task to kill all the monsters with only 2.3 shots. Thousand Sunsets did contact Yi Xi on the day after the first squadron was able to clear the automaton formation. He indirectly tried to entice Yi Xi, but the latter pretended to not understand his meaning. He could only give up and instructed Yi Xi to make preparations for the frosty wastes that the guild was planning to clear 2 weeks from now. Yi Xi was very familiar with the dungeon. There was no specific strategy of clearing it. All that was needed was a few specified potions. Yi Xi spent an entire week leveling up and training her life skills. She was finally able to learn the Huntress's trademark skill, Feign Death, after reaching LVL 20. A hunter without Feigned Death was not a hunter. Yi Xi had tried to loot the skill book before she hit LVL 20 but to no avail. In her moment of sadness, Ideal Height 1.7M had been the one to send her a Feigned Death skill book. She was extremely touched. After learning the skill Feigned Death, Yi Xi went through the Forgotten Volcanoes and arrived at the Winter's Hot Spring. It was situated at the western part of the eastern continent and was crawling with monsters at LVL 40.50. But there was a special herb that grew only in that area called the Herb of Warmth. It was a crucial material in crafting a novice Frostbane potion. But because it was a novice-tier material, its growth was also limited to a small area. It would only grow around the hot springs found in the Winter's Hot Springs map. A novice Frostbane potion did not have a high efficiency, but it was enough to handle the frost attacks of the mobs in the chilly marshes. The potion could protect players from a certain percentage of frost damage and also render players immune to the frost debuff. The herb wasn't available from the auction house due to its unique location. With stealth activated, Yi Xi carefully crept towards the hot spring in the center of Winter's Hot Spring. She avoided the monsters lurking around the area, and used Feigned Death to remove aggro whenever she was detected, then used stealth and pressed forward one again. The entire process took her more than 2 hours. The big hot spring in the middle of the map was called Big Hot Spring. Yi Xi was bewildered by this name. Could those developers be any lazier? As she approached Big Hot Spring, Yi Xi noticed a gigantic tortoise resting near the hot spring and her heartbeat increased. It was Winter's Hot Spring's wild boss, Armored Giant Tortoise. At her level, Yi Xi could not even peek at the stats of the Armored Giant Turtle, but it was something that she still remembered quite well. The Armored Giant Turtle was a LVL 40 monster. It was one of the few, passive, wild bosses in Fate, also known as Yellow. Named monster. As long as it was left alone, it would not actively attack any of the players. The boss itself was extremely tanky. Despite having a low attack value when compared to the other LVL 40 wild bosses, it was still a tough opponent for a LVL 20 player to fight. The Armored Giant Tortoise was the only monster in the vicinity. Yi Xi started to harvest the herbs around the area, but she still paid close attention to the Armored Giant Tortoise, only barely managing to hold herself back from trying to slay the boss. She knew very well that she did not have the capabilities to defeat the boss. But any player would feel the urge to try their luck against a wild boss that was literally represented a pile of top-tier equipment as they saw it. While waiting for the herbs to respawn after having harvested them, Yi Xi could do nothing but keep on staring at the Armored Giant Tortoise. Despite the high amount of bugs discovered in Fate, the giant armored tortoise was an exception. After harvesting more of the herbs, Yi Xi left the area, but turned back after having walking a short distance. The temptation of the loots dropped by a wild boss as well as the chance to obtain an epic quest was just too great for her to resist. The armored giant tortoise did not have a fixed spawn point. She was lucky to have run into the wild boss. If she missed this chance, she might not get another. The situation was ideal for her. There were no other monsters around. The chances of her accidentally triggering the aggro of the other monsters were next to none. Yi Si finally made up her mind. She'd regret it if she didn't even try to take down the armored giant tortoise. Feel free to track me down in Volari's Discord channel, yo. Ping me and I shall heed your summons. Also, I've set up my Patreon, and if you guys wink want to support the novel and help me out wink be my patron. XD. Chapter 50 Armored Giant Tortoise. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was easy to have dreams. But in the face of a real challenge, dreams may not be that easy to achieve. Yi Si sat at the edge of the hot spring, staring at the armored giant tortoise. She was considering strategy after strategy in order to defeat the boss. Armored Giant Tortoise, LVL 40. It was known for its tough hide and an unprecedented amount of HP. Along with its incredibly hard shell, its defense was not something that one could underestimate. When angered, the boss will breath out a thick layer of mist. Players affected by the mist will have their lowered speed and take continuous frost damage. This frost damage will slowly chip away at a player's HP. An even more absurd trait of this boss was that it will dive in the water to hunt for fishes to heal itself. With its tremendous amount of HP and its self-heal ability, the armored giant tortoise could be called overpowered. Despite that, when the average player level reaches LVL 40, hordes of players would still challenge the boss. This was because they wanted to obtain a shield with absolutely broken stats that would be dropped by the boss. This shield could be used by a warrior or a knight until they reach LVL 80. According to Yi Si's experience in her past life, Winter's Hot Spring was one of the most popular maps in the Eastern continent. The place was basically a second home for warrior and knight players. The spawn points of the armored giant tortoise was always crowded by players. Even back then, only 15 of those shields were dropped in the span of 10 years. The drop rate of the shield could only be said to be ridiculously low. Although she had no interest in the shield, Yi Si was still tempted to try and defeat the boss. A wild boss such as this would usually drop skill books and was also a chance for players to discover epic quests. Of course, one of the most crucial reasons for her desire to slay the boss was the 4 talent points rewarded for drawing first blood on wild bosses that were LVL 30 and above. These 4 talent points were very crucial for Yi Si. Yi Si circled the armored giant tortoise, trying to figure out its weak points. Its movements were slow, a perfect victim to kite. But with Yi Si's current stats, its level and defense were far too high. She would not be able to break through its defense. This meant that she could not dish out much damage to the boss. The creature was covered by a thick shell as tough as iron walls on all sides. But this did not mean that there was nothing Yi Si could do. The armored giant tortoise has 2 weaknesses. One weakness was at its neck, while the other was at its tail. These 2 spots were not covered by its armor. Instead, they were covered by a layer of very thin skin. Even at LVL 20, Yi Si could deal a high amount of damage to the boss if she was able to hit those 2 spots. But how? After pondering a bit, Yi Si gave up on attacking the neck. Although it was the easiest spot to hit and could even potentially damage the armored giant tortoise's heart, Yi Si had to position herself near its head to pull that off. Despite having a slow speed, the boss had rows of sharp teeth that Yi Si was particularly wary of. With her level, she'd die instantly if she got bitten. The only place left was the spot on the tail was also known as the ass. Yi Si looked up at sky and prepared herself mentally. As long as she was able to defeat this monster, she was willing to try anything. Yi Si gave up on attacking from a distance after taking their level differences into account. Besides, the weak spot was too small for her to hit accurately. Instead, she chose to use her venomous scorpion stinger for melee attacks. Attacks delivered by the venomous scorpion stinger had a chance of poisoning its target. Once poisoned, the target will continuously receive poison damage that ignored level differences. Yi Si walked up to the armored giant tortoise and planted a frost trap. She then backed off and fired an arrow at the monster. The arrow hit the armored giant tortoise that was still sleeping. It opened its eyes and studied its surroundings, looking for whoever or whatever that had dared to disturb its nap time. It saw Yi Si and let out an angry roar. The boss began to charge towards Yi Si at the speed of light. It took 2 steps forward, stepping on the frost trap planted by Yi Si earlier. The boss was instantly frozen. Yi Si ran towards the back of the big block of ice, resisting the urge of taking a selfie with the biggest block of ice she had ever created. Yi Si dashed to the location of the armored giant tortoise's tail and stabbed its backside repeatedly. 781, 311, 345 damage values floated in Yi Si's vision, along with a poisoned indicator that showed that the boss was poisoned. The ice entrapping the armored giant tortoise immediately disintegrated. It roared and attempted to turn around to attack Yi Si. However, she immediately released OL-3 to attract the aggro. She leaped away, spun around in midair, and shot an arrow aimed at the base of the tortoise's neck. 511 The attack triggered another poison attack, which stacked with the previous one. The arrow damaged the armored giant tortoise. It released the near-dead OL-3 and charged towards Yi Si, who kite the boss in circles with OL-3 attacking its tail. The entire situation was somewhat comical. Yi Si's strategy was simple. That was the only thing she could come up with against a boss that had no known bug. She put a distance between the boss and herself, then planted a frost trap whenever it was off CD. The boss would then get frozen and she would repeat the process of attacking its backside again and again as she had previously done. Slowly, the HP of the armored giant tortoise dropped. It was only a matter of time before it was defeated. It took Yi Si almost 8 hours to chip away the HP of the armored giant tortoise to 8% of its HP left. If she could hold on for another half an hour, Yi Si would be able to defeat the armored giant tortoise. However, at that moment, Yi Si felt a presence 10 meters away from her. In a flash, that feeling once again appeared directly behind her. She subconsciously shifted her body and heard a system notification chiming in, "You've successfully avoided an attack from Lazy Blue." Lazy Blue was an Orcish rogue. When he cast Staggering Blow on Yi Si, he would be forced out of stealth. He was surprised that his attack missed. He hesitated briefly, which was enough time for Yi Si to dart away and put up some distance between them. In combat, a player could not enter stealth. The first thing the rogue did after noticing Yi Si's disappearance was to look around to locate her. The moment the rogue caught sight of Yi Si, 2 arrows buried themselves into his body, almost taking away his life. He immediately drank a health potion and retreated. Yi Si did not know the rogue, nor could she possibly have any grudges with him. The only possible reason for him to appear at this place and time was for the armored giant tortoise. They must have been hiding for a long time, awaiting the right moment to strike as Yi Si tired herself out. But if the rogue was here for the armored giant tortoise, why would he retreat immediately after getting hit by 2 arrows? What if? Yi Si's heart sank as the HP of the rogue was filled up immediately. A cleric was nearby. In a fight against a wild boss, there would be more players than merely a cleric and a rogue. As expected, 3 more players appeared. One of them was a human warrior, an undead sorcerer and a human cleric. She narrowed her eyes, and began formulating a strategy. The warrior used charge on Yi Si as soon as he spotted her. A warrior's charge was very different from the charge skill possessed by Yi Si's boots. The active skill carried by Yi Si's boots was solely for escape. A warrior's charge would stun its target if the skill hit. What is the deciding factor in a PK? A player's adaptability and the player's ability to predict his or her enemy's movements. Yi Si had expected a charge from the warrior. She immediately dismissed OL3 and the armored giant tortoise immediately made its way towards Yi Si. She released a decoy with the warrior as the intended substitute. With a roar, the armored giant tortoise changed its course towards the warrior. Yi Si placed herself at the position where the armored giant tortoise and the warrior would collide. The success of her strategy depended on being at the correct place at the correct time and the moment the warrior and the armored giant tortoise collided, Yi Si immediately activated feigned death. Her body fell onto the ground like a ragged doll, just like a real corpse. Everything happened so fast that nobody was able to notice anything peculiar. The warrior was the only one who witnessed Yi Si's supposed death. He was distracted by the sudden drop of his HP and was alarmed. He immediately associated the gigantic tortoise in front of him with the sudden damage he received. This guy's damage is just crazy. Hurry! Heal me, with Yi Si feigning death, along with the use of decoy which transferred all her aggro towards the warrior, the poor warrior became the focus of the boss's attention. Even with his tough defenses, a LVL-20 warrior could never withstand the attacks from a LVL-40 wild boss. This was why he had shouted out in panic. I hope you guys enjoy the chapter. And go take a look at Jimmy's Patreon, yo. With great motivation comes great translation speed, if you know what I mean, just kidding.